I'm Helen Norbury, and this is Becoming Unapologetically Me, the show all about authentic self-expression with expert guests from the fields of health, leadership, and mindset. This show is here to show you that you don't need to conform to the expectations that friends, family, and society have of you, and actually what we can unearth when we find the courage to become the unapologetic version of who we are. Grab a cup of coffee and get your notepad out for this week's episode. Hello, and welcome back to Becoming Unapologetically Me. Today, I'm really thrilled to be talking to Dr. Randall Alifano. And I've recently read the most amazing book that he's written called Listening in the Raw. And so I really want to focus this conversation today around it because it brings up so many really interesting topics. So, Randall, I wonder if you can start by just giving us a bit of a brief introduction about who you are and a bit of an overview about what inspired you to write Listening in the Raw.
Okay, briefly, I've been a counselor therapist for 40 years. Absolutely in love with my work. I feel blessed every time I get to go to my office and really drop in and listen to people and see how they view the world. And I think genuinely what motivated me to write the book was a lifetime of noticing how people don't really listen. They listen to respond, or they listen to be clever in their response. And as you saw in the book, even as a young child, I noticed my family, everybody would be talking over each other and not really asking questions to find out what the speaker's really trying to say. And I actually felt the pain, the aloneness of that. And I think that's why I went into psychology and studied it. And finally, at my ripe old age, I finally decided to write the book because I just felt like I wanted to get the message out there that we could listen a lot better. Not only would our relationship be a lot better, but I think the world would be a lot better if we really listened.
100%. I remember someone saying to me many years ago, it was a workshop for something, I think, and they said, just if you have a question that pops in your head, just write it down so it comes out and gives space for you to hear what's being said in that moment, because otherwise the only thing going round and round your head is that thing that you want to say. And actually, you already know what you were going to say because that is knowledge that you already have. And actually, whilst your head's full of that, you're not able to learn new things that might be being shared with you by the person who's currently speaking. So I think the whole topic really touched my heart from that perspective. But I just want to start at the beginning. That seems a good place to start. So right at the beginning of the book, it says, you write, "The heart of listening resides in the heart. Do you remember a time when someone asked you questions and you could sense all they wanted to understand was your experience and how that allowed you to speak more freely, more openly, and more vulnerably?" And this book is an invitation to reconnect to the longing we all have to be heard by someone who only wants to hear us without any other intention, but to understand what it is like to be us. And that really made me think, do you think we're losing that skill of really listening? Or are we in a place where we risk losing it as technology takes a larger and larger role in our lives?
Well, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think one of the downsides of technology is we listen a lot less and we spew a lot more. We just, because there's no real interaction to check what one is saying or to contradict it or to join with it. But generally speaking, I think we've never been very good at listening. There's so much emphasis on speaking our truth and expressing ourselves, which I'm a big fan of, but there's not as much focus on how do we really listen so we really do understand what's going on underneath that person's narrative. And the example you gave, I think of parts. There's a part that always wants to say, oh yeah, me too, I had that. And how to refocus of, yes, that part's going to be talking in my head, but really my intention is I really want to understand what it's like over there. And time again, when I choose that, when I figure out what's going on over there, I'm not alone. There's a resonance here with what is going on over there. I may not feel it unless I ask the questions and follow my intuition until I go, oh, that. So when your mom did that to you, this is how it really felt. And that's a real intention to drop in and go, okay, that's what I'm going to do today, is really hear what the person's saying, including myself, by the way.
All of us, for sure. And how do you think you learn to ask the right questions? Because what you're sharing there is actually it's really important to ask the right questions and not just plow on regardless, but really focus in the right spaces. So how do you think you tune into that?
That is a really good question. My answer to that, I think, would be, as you read in the book, innocence. If you watch a young child who hasn't been hurt, neglected somehow that they have to shut down, their curiosity is free. We were up on a cliff looking down on a beach over the weekend, watching this little kid just run around, throw sand. I thought, they're just in their curiosity. They're exploring everything and dancing from thing to thing. And that's my experience in listening to people is if I'm genuinely curious about them, the questions come naturally. They'll say something like, my mom didn't listen to me. Now I could say, yeah, lots of moms don't listen. My curiosity, how so? What happened when she didn't listen? And so just to drop into that identification of the one who's curious, who genuinely wants to see what's going on, the questions just come.
I know you mentioned just earlier, and obviously I've read about it, but not necessarily everyone listening to this will have done yet. You had a number of childhood experiences where you didn't feel listened to or didn't feel heard. What was it that took you from that place to thinking, you know what, I need to write a book about this. I need to really go a lot deeper into the topic and explore it and crack it open for the world to hear. What was that journey that brought you to the place of actually writing the book?
Well, that's a 3-day conversation right there. In my PhD program, you have to write a dissertation. And when I was thinking about what do I want to write about, I wanted to explore an experience I kept on having in my office, which I later coined empathic surrender, where I would be asking questions, following my curiosity about what it's like for that person. And suddenly I would just be in this kind of reverie where I would be quiet inside. And whatever they were talking about feeling, it felt like it entered me, like the portal opened up. Oh, that's what it was like for you. And it was so powerful. And when I would talk to colleagues, 30% understood what I was talking about. And the other were thinking I was a bit crazy. What I noticed was mostly it was women that understood. I hardly met any men that had that experience. So it really piqued my curiosity. And I thought, I'm going to ask my professors if I could write a dissertation where I'm exploring an experience. And thankfully, they had faith in me. So they let me write this very long dissertation about empathic surrender. And that was 30 years ago. And then finally, I thought, time to write a book.
Absolutely. Get it out to the masses. That's a tricky one, though, isn't it? In your role as a counselor, when you're literally taking on the emotions of your client, that could become really hard for you to keep those boundaries and still be able to maintain your energy to support your client without it literally taking you down as well. So how do you manage that?
You've really done your homework. I'm very happy about this. Yeah, it is challenging. That's why I say empathic surrender is a temporary moment where you allow the penetration of this material, the depth of it, but then you take a breath and come back to, okay, now what do we do about that? And so it's a reverie, but you don't stay in that reverie 24/7.
That must have taken a bit of teaching yourself of how to do that.
It did, but it wasn't effortful. The odd part is it felt so natural. And then the second part of your question is therapists talk about empathy fatigue. And I think we have that all wrong. I think people experience empathy fatigue after being therapists for years, for example, is because when the emotions come through, they contract. The client is in terrible pain, for example, and they're like, oh my God, this is so horrible. And they're like this instead, open and really the pain be in here, but without contraction. Because I've noticed, like I've said, I've been doing this for 40 years. I don't have any empathy fatigue because it feels like more of a flow than it getting stuck in here.
Yeah. Yeah, you hear a lot about empathy fatigue, compassion fatigue, people who are working in healthcare settings and places like that where there's a lot to deal with on a day-to-day basis. It sounds like you could teach them an awful lot. For the people who are reading, listening in the raw, what would you like them to take away from reading it?
I would pique their interest into a different level of listening. I would like them to have the experience of really hearing what's being spoken under the words. So they have that sense of union of once there was a speaker and a listener, and now somehow we're intimately connected into what's going on. I would love them to have that experience, because once you have that, you don't want to let it go. You're not interested in superficial contact as much. You really want to drop in and feel this sense of unity with other in today's world, where with not only, shall I say, the politics of America, but also, like you said, social media, so much separation, division.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking just recently to someone about how I don't know who or where it's coming from, but this kind of force to divide girls and boys. So the young kids growing up today, like the boys hate the girls, hate the boys, and everyone blames everyone else for their challenges in life. And see how harmful that is to us as a society, and that not listening to each other, not hearing each other, not understanding or even attempting to understand each other. And what's the long-term impact that's going to have on us as a society and relationships and friendships and family units, all of those challenges that are going to be caused by the superficiality of how we engage with each other currently.
Yeah, then we become a we, you and us, as opposed to us.
Absolutely. Yes. That brings me really nicely onto another quote that I picked up from the book, actually, that we've so fully normalized not being listened to that we're not surprised when it happens to us. And we may not even recognize that we are listening to others with a busy, noisy mind. And we've all colluded and accepted this norm, even though it reinforces our core suffering of loneliness. I had to read it a couple of times because it really hit hard, that message, and that creation of loneliness by not communicating, not listening at the deeper levels. And so it really inspired me to ask you, how do you see your work as helping or almost being an antidote to loneliness?
Exactly that. In my parlance, to listen in the raw. And I want to say, when I first started my practice, somebody rather inappropriately referred someone to me who was very traumatized. It was a multiple, and he misread that entirely. And it was so far above anything I'd ever heard. The level of horror she sustained as a child growing up, it would made Stephen King want to run away.
I think you wrote about her in the book, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to do. I knew I could listen to her stories, or she would recount what happened to her. And I was really with her while she was talking about these things. And that aloneness that you spoke of, that was one of the main elements. She felt alone. She had spoken to many, many therapists before, and people were so horrified by the story, they would, contract. She would pick it up like that. And then she'd step back and be a good client and talk about what she thought the counselor, therapist wanted to talk about. But because I was genuinely curious about, what was it like for you? She could really go into it. And so she taught me, get out of your head, don't diagnose, don't assess, or do that tangentially. Really just hear what I'm trying to say. She had a desperation for someone to hear what it was like for her. And then the rest was easy. The rest was just clear.
I think that's so true, particularly those traumatic experiences that people have gone through, that it can feel really isolating and no one gets it because thankfully, mercifully, most people don't get it from a lived experience perspective. But that's not to say that you can't be with someone in that or be with someone with that, and and that sense then that you're not broken in inverted commas because you're all alone. Actually, someone's still going to sit with you and be with you through the messiness until you can find your way out the other side together.
See, that's a really important delineation. Am I broken or am I alone? And we tend to mush those together. So people feel broken. They need repair. They're sick. They need to be healed. As opposed to, wait, none of that. I just feel terribly alone in this place. I need other. And that's why, to me, interdependence is so important in this realm, because we are dependent on each other to feel union.
So if you were going to explain a really core theme in the book, and you had that elevator pitch, if you like, that moment to explain what the book is all about, what would that sound like to someone that you were sharing that with?
That's a big question too. I have 3 responses in my head. I think the one I want to go with is just get out of your way, down, and be committed to what the other person's trying to communicate. This is something I tell parents a lot. When you're talking to a 5-year-old, or rather when a 5-year-old is trying to talk to you, they struggle with language. They don't know exactly how to say it. It's easy to get a bit impatient, as opposed to giving them all the time and space they need to find the language and ask a question to help them. That 5-year-old, instead of feeling like, I didn't do it right, I'm broken, mom, dad, whomever has just left or criticized me or teased me or something, to give them that space. And when they finally get the message out, they're not alone anymore. And they will, I guarantee you, they will carry that into adulthood. I know what it's like for someone to have the patience, the intention to really listen and get me. I don't want to settle for something less. I want that kind of contact.
So do you think as life has got busier and faster, this is what happens? Because when you were saying that story about how you support parents with younger children, I'm thinking, yeah, we just race around in life a lot, don't we? We never stop. We never just give that time to listen deeply, listen fully. It's quick, get the information onto the next thing. Do you believe that plays a role in where we're at today with communication and listening and feeling heard?
I think we're certainly making it worse. But again, when I was growing up, it wasn't so busy. My dad came home every night to have dinner. We'd always sit around the table. And still, even as a young kid, I'd sit there and be sensitive to the fact of no one's really asking questions. No one's really listening. So somehow we've been, I don't know, hardwired or trained through the millennium to not really listen, but to be off balance in the talking part. Like you probably saw in the book, in school, there's a debate club, but there's no listening club.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I started in my consultancy career, someone said to me, you were given 1 mouth and 2 ears. Use them in that ratio. And honestly, that was right at the beginning of my career. And I always held on to that message because I think it's so important.
Yes, absolutely. Even with therapists, I don't know how it is there in the UK, but in the US, therapists are trained to assess, diagnose, and then treat the diagnosis. So already they have this thick filter on, are you a narcissist? Are you a borderline? And that truncates listening, profoundly gets in the way of really getting to know the person. So how to take those filters off, at least temporarily be raw, allow this penetration right into your heart.
So what were some of your biggest challenges writing the book and how did you overcome them?
Well, now you're getting personal. Actually, insecurity. I realized I did not want to write an academic book. I wanted it to just be an expression of me and what I've learned. And so there was a little voice in my head saying, who's going to read this? It's not academic and such. And then I heard a little voice in my head, which said, how the book does out in the world is not your choice. The only choice you have is to write or not to write. And that freaked me up. It was a little bit like listening in the raw. It was, I'm just writing in the raw. I'm going to write what moves me, what touches me, what I've learned all these years. And whoever reads it and is touched by it, I'll be grateful. And that's enough. And thankfully, it really has been enough. Hey, it's not on the New York Times bestseller list. What's wrong? There are individuals who reach out to me and talk to me about the book, and it touches me.
I was going to ask you that as well, in fact, in terms of what are some of the feedbacks or the contacts that people have had with you in terms of how the book has impacted them in their lives? Is there any stories around that you can share?
Well, one sweet story is a colleague cornered me and said, I just read your book. Thank you for reminding me what it's like to be a therapist. And what he was communicating was he had gotten lost in his role as a therapist and forgot to just come home to unfiltered listening. And the level of gratitude in his voice touched me to the core that woke him up to why he came into the field.
Yeah, particularly in a work which is very heart motivated at the beginning. And I always think, around doctors and nurses in the ER and places like that as well, or even teachers in schools as well. They've gone into that job because they're passion motivated or purpose motivated. And then the admin gets in the way and they just have to tick the boxes, like you say, diagnose, get to that place. And before you know it, you've maybe lost touch with that initial motivator that got you into that work in the beginning. So I can see how powerful that is as almost like a little snap to remind you, actually, this wasn't what it was about. It wasn't about diagnosing and ticking boxes. It was about connecting to the people, my patients, and how do I do that in the most effective way? And yeah, really beautiful.
And the kicker is not only for them, but for the listener too. With every person I've spoken to and really dropped in, impacted as it were, the tumblers have moved inside of me. My filters get tweaked.
So, I mean, there's loads of books, which you go to any bookshop, the shelves are full of books on communication and listening and, all sorts of topics around that subject area. What do you think it is about listening in the raw that really sets it apart from all of those other books?
I would like to think that a lot of those other books talk about listening so that the speaker feels heard. They tend to be technique type books, and that's not a bad thing. But I feel like what I'm trying to express is step out of those techniques. Don't make the intention, I want that person to feel like they're heard. I want my intention to be, am I really hearing them? Because it's not just up here. Is my body responding in a way that there's a resonance? Then the rest is gravy, as they say. Then that's when the speaker really does feel heard. And not only am I serving them by really hearing them, like I said, serving me also, because now I'm being stretched and moved in ways a moment ago I hadn't experienced, I didn't know about. So to me, the goal, the kicker of listening in the raw is it's not just for the speaker, it's for both of us. And to me, that changes the whole paradigm.
How do we go about educating the next generation about, like you say, in schools, they have debating clubs. They will many of them learn how to speak, but certainly not listening. If, my experience of two teenagers is anything much to go by. So how do we help the next generation to learn what to me sounds like such an essential part of their life toolkit? And especially as more and more of their communication comes through social media, through online methods, how do we support our children, our grandchildren to learn this?
Everybody should read my book.
Yeah, I think that's the answer. Yeah.
I actually think it starts with parents, how they listen, to help parents really listen to their children. Because I have 3 boys, and myself included, I can pinpoint places when they were growing up where I just dropped the ball. I was tired, I had to go to work, I had this, and I didn't sit down and drop in and go, what is it, sweetie? And the moments when I did do that, my kids will still talk about those moments. Papa, remember that time when, because it meant so much. So how do we just change that paradigm where the main job of a parent is to listen and the rest will take care of itself? And then those children grow up knowing what really listening is about, what it feels like. And of course, they just organically want to do it for other.
For sure. And like you were mentioning earlier, their sense of self-worth, self-esteem, they know that they can demand that level of communication from somebody else in the future because they are worthy of being listened to in that way. So then it raises the bar across the field because they're not going to settle for someone who only occasionally listens to them or half listens to them or doesn't listen to them at all.
They're going to know what it's like to really have that. Yes.
Yeah. And that's so important then for the role modeling of the future, isn't it?
Exactly that. Exactly that.
So what do you believe is the most misunderstood aspect of communication and listening from that sort of empathic surrender? But how would you correct a misperception that someone may have currently?
Well, I think that we've been programmed, almost hardwired, to emphasize the speaking and to do a paradigm shift of, yes, speaking's important. Like one of the ways is become unapologetically me. I want to be able to speak my truth. But to be unapologetically me, I also have to be able to listen so I can hear my truth, just being reactive off old systems that I use to survive, whatever defenses or protections. So how to communicate. And I do think I wish they did teach this at school. What's it like to really listen to when Janie is saying her story about her dog? What happens inside of you? What touches you? Where do you get curious about what kind of dog is it, or what happened to the dog, or what was it like for Janie? To just generate the children's curiosity about what's going on over there. I really want to understand, because I think genuinely they do.
I totally agree. And I've said it on this podcast before with people that children jumping in puddles, they have complete abandon to do the thing that brings them joy in the moment, to ask the questions that you see the parents going, shh, don't ask that, it's rude, or something like that. But the child doesn't think with all of that social conditioning. They think from their curiosity and from joy and from just experiencing everything that life has to offer.
Yes, exactly that. It's funny, you remind me of a story with my mom. I think I was 10 years old, and I asked her with real curiosity, where do babies come from? And she said, honey, come here. We went to her bedroom and she picked out a book. She showed me the physiology of sex and where babies come from. And I remember saying to her, oh, I thought this was dirty. And she said, oh, no, honey, it's not dirty at all. You see right here, it's just, and it blew my doors off. And to this day, I can think of, she could have handled that 1,000 different ways, but she could feel my curiosity. And she met me right there. That opened me up to what sexuality was about. And it took it out of the whole sexist kind of programming that was going on at the time, or has always gone on, I guess. And in fact, she said, Rand, it's really quite beautiful. Talk about shifting a filter. Even as a 10-year-old, I'd already learned. I would pray that parents would start to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So has anything evolved in your thinking or your perspective since you wrote the book that now you go, actually, a little update on that bit, I would think about it slightly differently? Or is it all pretty solid?
There have been times I thought, I should edit the book and add this and add that. It's funny that you asked, because I was just been reading Schopenhauer. He was the pessimist, they called him, because he thought life was suffering. He was borrowing from Eastern philosophies. But one of the things he said to get us out of that was to really, he called it compassion. But when I read between the lines, I'm thinking 200 years ago, this man was talking about really dropping in and feeling what it's like for that other person. And that created union. That was a way out of our suffering, that our suffering was actually isolation. And I was scratching my head going, why didn't I read Schopenhauer in more detail before I wrote the book? Because he'd be throughout the whole thing. That someone was trying to teach us about this 200 years ago, and we're still not listening.
Interesting, isn't it? What's it take for that message to land at a sort of a cultural level rather than little pockets of individuals, but at a cultural level for that message to land?
The other piece I'd like to say is 2 of the chapters in the book, one was curiosity, one was innocence. I think this could be universal. I'm actually, through curiosity, I'm genuinely intrigued by how you see the world, experience the world. So kind of like you say, it's a playground. It's, tell me more. What's it like? And it's exciting. It's fun. So now listening, even as a therapist, isn't arduous. It's not something I have to do. It's, oh, John's coming in today. Yeah, I want to hear more about that thing, John.
Yeah, I can so resonate with that. My dad lived in South Africa. And, as a young child, getting to experience something that was a world away from me, in visiting Southern Africa, not just South Africa, and learning all about a completely different way of living life and a whole new world. And it wasn't in an era where we had the internet and I could just search it up, as my kids say, to see what life was like in South Africa. But yet I got the opportunity to have a lived experience through talking and learning other people's perspectives. And the same, I just want to soak that all up like a sponge to understand what life is like from their perspective and how that relates to me and my life and what's different, what's the same, and just that total curiosity around it.
That was beautifully said. I love soak it up like a sponge. You want to take in what it's like for them, and then it expands you.
So what's next for Listening in the Raw? How do you take this forwards now? Have you got any more projects in the pipeline, or what's the future direction for you?
Well, I'm going to Iceland. I'm excited about that right now. I don't know. There was a couple of people have said you should write a second book geared specifically to parents. Get down to the minutia of how we parents get in the way. But the truth is, I just don't feel like sitting and writing right now. I feel like walking in the sun and sitting on the beach. And that may come eventually. But right now, frankly, Helen, I just feel blessed that I get to sit in my office, listen to folks, call my children, really hear them. I feel blessed. So I'm feeling pretty content these days.
Amazing. Oh, that's awesome. I'm sure the hot springs in Iceland will be inspiring as well. It's somewhere that I've looked at. I'm not going in the winter. It's way too cold for me. But for sure, at this time of year or into the summer, it'd be gorgeous there. Thank you so much for this conversation. I knew it was going to be a deep and inspiring conversation. Of course it was going to be, but it's still surpassed all my expectations in terms of where this conversation would go. So thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. And I would just really encourage everybody listening to explore your work, because it really is life-changing, I believe, to be able to and open to hear people in the way that you share within the book. So really, thank you so much.
Thank you. This was lovely. Your questions, the depth with which you asked them, I felt a genuine connection with you. So Thank you so much.
Thank you, Randall. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this episode of Becoming Unapologetically Me. Make sure you subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts so you never miss an episode.